Hi everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. To those who are new, thanks for checking out my channel. If you like diverse reading and Canadian literature, then please hit subscribe and stick around. It's Monday, and that means another episode of the Mondays with Margaret series. Today, we will be talking about Margaret Atwood's first collection of short fiction, and it's called Dancing Girls and Other Stories. Dancing Girls was originally published in 1977, and there are 14 stories in the collection. There are several editions of this collection, and depending on when they were published and which version they have depends on the 14 stories in them. So my edition is a copy of the original 14 stories, so I will go through those, and then at the end I will share the stories that are different. And as usual, I won't give away any spoilers, so if you haven't read it, no worries. If you stick around until the end of the video, I am going to share one of the bazillion Bernie Sanders memes that have been going around that I thought was quite appropriate for this series. So the first story is called The War in the Bathroom, and it takes place in a boarding house where the bathroom is shared. And just like the title suggests, there really is a war for the bathroom. The story is divided up into days over a 1-week period from Monday to Sunday. And throughout those days, we learn of when the bathroom gets used by who and what can be heard throughout the house. How this story is told is what makes it interesting. There is a bit of a who the narrator is kind of a mystery, and if you have any ideas, I would love to hear them. And I have wondered this before, whether or not Atwood has ever lived in a boarding house. She has a few stories, and like The Edible Woman, and she has had some poems too that we've read that have been set, in either with landlords and landladies. And I think the setting lends itself well to interesting and potentially comical situations. The second story is called The Man from Mars, and the main character is Christine. She meets a man in the park, and this man is described as a person from another culture. He is asking for directions, and they communicate as best as they can. The man starts following Christine, kind of showing up wherever she is. She doesn't really know what he wants or if he's harmful. When Christine finally learns where he is from, she becomes obsessed with learning more about it, but by then it's probably too late. And I think what I loved most about this story was that it paints a good picture of the assumptions that we often make of others, especially those different than us. Next is Polarities, and central to this story is the friendship between Louise and Morrison. Morrison is a professor who sometimes doesn't feel part of his own body, and Louise is a graduate student who becomes more agitated as the story progresses. She believes that she has to gather people to change the electrical currents in the city. The story includes ideas of what women should be, and it is a unique look at mental illness. Under Glass is the next story, and I didn't really care for this one. It's a story of a newly married couple. Their relationship is already on the rocks. The husband has had an affair and dismisses the behavior. And the next one is The Grave of the Famous Poet, which I think was one of my favorites. This is a couple is visiting in a small town. We don't know where they are. They are tourists looking for a gravesite of a poet. We don't know which one. Their relationship seems very mundane, and then something happens that might change that, but maybe not for the better. This poem has themes of death and drowning. The next story is Rape Fantasies, which probably gets a lot of attention just from its oxymoron title. A group of women start talking in the workplace about having rape fantasies, and as they share their fantasies, they realize they aren't really about rape at all. However, the narrator is who turns the story on its head by she tells how she would get out of various rape situations, and some of them are very absurd and even comical, and I think only Atwood would be able to write a story like this. Hair Jewelry is another story of a rocky relationship or unrequited love. I quite liked it. We follow the main character from Boston to New York City. Our young narrator has high hopes of a relationship, and I loved how Atwood brought the theme of identity into this story. I loved the line, "I shed identities like a snake," which showed a bit of naivete on the narrator's part, thinking that by changing who she is to suit those around her would change things. And we kind of saw that a bit in Lady Oracle. There is also the theme of escapism in this one too, and I liked the idea of people remaining in our lives even when we think the relationships are over. When It Happens is about Mrs. Burge and her husband Frank. It starts off very uncomplicated, with Mrs. Burge putting her canned pickles away for the winter. But while doing so, she begins to fantasize about a complete societal breakdown, and then the unexpected happens. And this one left me wondering exactly what happened. So if you have thoughts on this one, please share them in the comments. The next story was another favorite for me, a travel piece. It's about a travel writer named Annette who is traveling and thinking about how a writer cannot write about the dangers of travel. You know, the idea is to make home be the dangerous place and encourage people to leave on vacation to escape or get away from it. So she can't report on the hazards of travel. And then the plane she's in crashes, and Annette might change her mind on her thoughts. Another interesting one is The Resplendent Quetzal. This is about Sarah and Edward. Their relationship is also on shaky ground, and we follow them as they are tourists. And this story has similar themes to some of the other stories. There's marriage, miscarriage, and the one I like most in this one was the ways we disguise our true selves. Training is about Rob, who works at a camp with kids with disabilities, and he works with Jordan, who is 9 years old and in a wheelchair. And their relationship is quite beautiful, but misunderstandings change everything. And this story had a bit of a horror feel to it. It had themes of bullying and the importance of communication. Lives of the Poets is one of the stories I didn't really care for. Like a few of the other stories, it takes place on a campus. The main characters are Markia, Bernie, and Julia. And art is an important theme in this one, and the struggle of trying to make a living through art. And then the title story is next, Dancing Girls. It takes place in either an apartment building or a boarding house with a motley crew of characters and a landlady. And this story also has a theme of foreigners. And then the final story is Giving Birth, which is kind of a haunting story about a woman who sees a ghost version of herself and through her works out her worst fears and trepidations of motherhood and giving birth. Now, if you have one of the later editions, then there are two of these stories that are not in the book. So the first story, The War in the Bathroom and Rape Fantasies. Instead, those editions include a story called Betty, which I really liked and thought was a much more fleshed out story. The narrator is 7 years old and has an older sister who is, I think, 11 or 12. And when they lived in Ottawa, they had neighbors in their apartment that the husband beat his wife. But at their summer cottage, their neighbors are Fred and Betty. Everyone loves Fred, and Betty is so kind, but people aren't really drawn to her the way that they are to Fred. And when the narrator's older sister finds a friend, the narrator begins spending more time with Betty and gets to know her. And then one day something is wrong with Betty. And I loved that we saw this story through the eyes of a child. This story has themes of marriage, identity, roles, and expectations of women. And then the other story that is in later editions is called The Sin Eater. And this is about a psychiatrist named Joseph and one of his patients who is the narrator. And we learn how important Joseph is to many women's lives and how they have learned about him from each other. The narrator talks about how she doesn't find reality to make sense, and Joseph is really the only one who seems to not contradict her on this. And then Joseph dies, and now what will the women do? So for the most part, I really enjoyed these short stories. They have the Atwood signature for sure. I'm still finding that I'm not connecting to the characters. The stories, the themes, and the messages, yes, for sure. But there have been characters I've related to, but there hasn't really been a character that I can say I have really felt connected to yet. But I think it's coming. I was trying to figure out if there were any new themes, and for the most part, I didn't really find anything other than travel and other locations are starting to come into Atwood's writing. So we saw that first with Lady Oracle and with a few of these short stories. So that's been interesting. But I find that women's roles or expected roles in society, marriage, identity, death are still some of the main themes. And really, I think it all comes down to relationships for Atwood, and Margaret Atwood does that very well. Next week, our last Monday in January, I think we are going to see something a little different. It's another non-fiction book, and at least it was different than I expected. Plus, I promised that I would show you the Bernie meme that I thought was pretty great. So I'm going to show that. And this is Tom Power from CBC interviewing Margaret Atwood. And there's Bernie Sanders hanging out with them too. So when I saw this, I thought that was pretty fantastic. As always, I will leave the reading schedule for this series in the description box below. Right now, it goes until the end of April. Please let me know what you thought of Dancing Girls and other stories. Were there some stories that you liked more than others? What did you think of the characters and the themes? Were there some themes that I maybe missed? Did you see anything new? I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Thanks again for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day. And don't forget to make every day an adventure.